Hey, everybody. Welcome to this brand new episode of the Family Table Podcast. I'm excited. Anytime I get to have a guest on my podcast, I'm always super excited because of the conversation that we're having. It just so happens that today, my special guest is Kris Vallotton. He's no stranger to the Destiny Image Podcast Network. He's no stranger to many of us. He's wrote so many books over the years that have impacted our lives. My life especially, one of his books, Heavy Rain, was a major book that came into my life in 2016 when the Lord was downloading new blueprints for our life and our ministry today. But today we're actually talking about Kris's brand new book, Uprising, the epic battle for the most fatherless generation in history. This is a powerful book. It's a powerful conversation that we're about to have. And it's a book that you definitely need. And some of you may be watching this podcast today and say, well, he must be speaking to men. Yes, this podcast is dedicated to men becoming sons, husbands, and fathers, coming back to Abba's original intent for what that looks like. But let me tell you something. This book that Kris wrote is a book that every person should read, male, female, whether you're in that phase of just being a son or a father, you're a mother. You need this book. It's a fathering book. You can get so much downloads from the Father's heart reading this book because it deals with cultural issues, relationship issues, marriage issues, parental issues. It's powerful. You need to get a copy of the book. But before we jump in the interview, I just want to tell you about our men's online community. We have a men's online community we call the Rite of Passage. It's a monthly membership group where we're constantly uploading resources for those of you as men who want to take this journey, this adventure with the Lord, and be equipped for what it means to be a son, which is identity as one of the sons of God. We've got resources for husbands. We've got resources for fathers. We'd love for you to jump into that group. There's always interaction happening in the Facebook group and new content and new teaching that we're uploading for you to just go deep and learn what it means from Abba's idea, what it means for you to be a son, husband, and father. We'd love for you to be a part of that. So check out the link in the description below. We'd love for you to be a part of that community. But let's jump in today with this conversation with Kris Vallotton about his brand new book, Uprising. All right, everybody, welcome to the Family Table Podcast. We're committed to equipping men to become sons, husbands, and fathers. And I'm your host, Mark Casto. And today I have the amazing privilege to interview Senior Associate Leader of Bethel Church in Redding, California, co-founder of the Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, and the author of new book, Uprising, the epic battle for the most fatherless generation in history. I've got Kris Vallotton. Kris, welcome to the Family Table Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, as I said before we started recording, just so thankful to have this time with you. It's an honor to have you on the podcast, talk about this book. And I just wanted to start off by saying how much I appreciate you, not only for championing the prophetic and the outpouring of the Spirit and the supernatural, but also your commitment to writing and preaching about wholeness for humanity and for individuals. And honestly, that's kind of a rare thing among Pentecostal charismatic world to champion both. So I just want to start off by telling you, thank you for leading the way in that.
Well, thanks for your encouragement, man. Seriously, I'm getting more encouraged. I'm supposed to be encouraging you. This is
Oh, man. Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, I feel like so many in our world, we talk about spiritual warfare. We talk about the prophetic. We talk about spiritual things, and very few get down into the nitty-gritty details that bring about wholeness. And so I grew up in a Pentecostal world where God was moving, but relationships were dysfunctional. Fathers were not present. Most of the mothers led the church, And so, man, when I got a hold of your book, Uprising, I was like, man, this is a conversation that is needed, much needed, and I wanted to have with you. So it's, again, an honor for you to take this time and talk to us about your new book.
Thank you. It might be the most important work that I personally have ever done. I think that, it's a real prophetic declaration for this generation that we live in right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I know that you got a full plate, and I want to jump in because I've got about 6 questions I'm going to try to get to if we possibly can.
Here we go.
But question number one is, many people know the damning statistics of fatherlessness, but very few people have actually seen like a picture of fatherlessness like right in their face. So before you ever became this senior associate leader of Bethel and a successful author, you were actually a volunteer youth pastor that ran like an open gym twice a week, and you used the story of you being in Lewiston as like a big backdrop for your book. Could you spend a few moments kind of giving people a picture of what that was like for you and your family?
What actually happened is that I was a youth pastor for 9 years as a volunteer youth pastor at Mountain Chapel under Bill Johnson for 9 years. We owned businesses, but I did it as a volunteer. And we had really touched a lot of kids. We have a very large youth group for the size of our church. And then we hired a full-time youth pastor because that grew to like 120, 130 kids. And so I was like looking for my next, my real next mission, like where am I going? And the Lord had told me 10 years earlier that he was going to give me this little town of Lewiston, which was only 900 people, 20 minutes from where we lived, 30 minutes from where we lived in the mountains. And that's a longer story that it's in the book. But so I went there and prayed for 1 year. And at the end of 1 year, literally at the end of 1 year, the last Sunday of 1 year, on Monday morning, the probation officer, his name was Dick Mavey, called me, who I used to work on their cars. He wasn't a believer that I know of, at least to this day. And he said, hey, we are going to do a class of a mandatory class for all the parents of kids that are on probation in Lewiston who have broken probation. And there's about 37 of them. And their parents have to either go to the class or their kids are going back into juvenile hall. Wow. And what we'd like to do while we do the parenting classes, we would want to know if you would take the kids 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, for from like 7 to 9 and do something with them. And he goes, I know you used to be a youth pastor. You could probably figure out something to do with kids. But he said this to me, he says, but you can't Bible bang them because it's a, government sponsored program. So there's no, you can't preach to them.
All right.
You can't preach Jesus to them is what he said to me. So anyway, the short story is we opened that gym expecting to be 37 kids who were on probation. And the first night we had, 110 kids. And it was just crazy, out of control. 5 fist fights the first night. I literally tackled 5, well, more than 5. I mean, there's takes 2 to tangle. I broke up 5 fights, and most of them were from me tackling these kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old.
Wow.
And it was mayhem the first night. But I told the story. The Lord gave me the story, and he downloaded to me in probably 20 seconds a fiction story about purity, about sexual purity. I actually wrote a book called Moral Revolution. It has that story in there. Yeah. Anyway, I told this story at halftime. So what we did is we played basketball and volleyball inside this gym that they gave us, which was just at a rickety old, leaked like a sieve in the winter gym, no heater. And then at halftime, we had a half-hour halftime, and we, Kathy brought Coke and sodas, and she baked cookies, which turned out to be totally not enough the first day. But and we had them sit on park benches inside, and then I talked to them. And this very first night, I talked to them about sexual purity, and obviously couldn't use the Bible, but I gave them biblical principles. And I actually did it through telling the story about what they didn't know is the story was about a person losing their virginity, but it was in a parable called The Ring. And at the end of the story, after this guy fights for this, fights for this ring and this whole story, Anyway, long story. And I say at the end of the story, that ring is your virginity, which the girl lost. The toughest guy in the room goes, no one effing ever told me about this. And he's weeping.
Wow.
And I look up and all the kids on benches are weeping. They're all weeping, not a dry eye. And I'm like, okay, the Lord's given me these kids.
Yeah.
I don't have a single Christian. And I shared this longer story in the book, but I had one kid that had a dad. One. I'm not even talking about I'm counting stepdads. I'm talking about live-in dads. I had one kid out of all those 120 kids, 37 on probation, that had a father. Now,
wow.
The only one. And I was with those kids for 5 years, two days a week. My contract was for 6 weeks. I didn't get paid anything to do it, but I agreed to 6 weeks, and I ended up 5 years, 2 days a week there.
Wow.
And I saw kids radically affected, and we became a surrogate fathers to, hundreds of kids over 5 years.
That's so wild because, like you said, you come in, you have this large group of teenagers basically, and only one of them had a present father. And you use that as such a great backdrop for the entire book, because, again, I think so many people know the statistics, but they don't see what it actually looks like. They may see it from a distance. I mean, most of what you're seeing as chaos in our country right now in media, that's the result of fatherlessness. I have a spiritual father by the name of Damon Thompson in my life, and he said we could fix every major issue in America by putting a present father in every home. And I mean, just reading your story about the impact and the frequency of a father's voice, even right there in the first night of you gathering and watching the tears flow down their cheeks, is because they've never heard that frequency of a father telling them something. So I had to ask you about it because, again, that's like a front row picture of the results and devastation of fatherlessness and how quickly the impact came from you just being present in their life a couple times a week.
Yeah. We saw so much change there. As a matter of fact, I share it in the book, but that was they called it the armpit of Trinity County. That's where most of crime happened. It was there was 750 homes. There's 900 homes 900 people that live in Lewiston. 750 of them live in a subdivision, which they built when they built the dam. So you can imagine what kind of housing it is. It's just regular, it's very low income housing.
Right.
And it was like, it was your typical ghetto when we started. And by the 5th year, they had built a park there. The houses were cleaned up. The drugs stopped. I mean, not completely, but dropped by over 90%. The sheriff was our closest friend. So, we had all the statistical data, and we won 2 community awards. The Lions Club gave us an award. Also, they funded all of the refreshments.
Wow.
The second year. So we had it was a very small town, but we had a huge impact on that town. And it said, so I began to say, if God could do this here, could God do it in a bigger city?
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. And so that's kind of like a personal picture for you. So kind of taking it back to a bigger picture and more of speaking to the culture. In the book, you posed a question: what's going on in the world that's having such an intensely negative impact upon families? And you take us back to 2 particular issues in the 1960s that you said was the foundation, where the foundation of fatherlessness was laid. Could you take a moment and talk about the impact? And this could probably be the whole podcast, but take a moment and talk about the impact of the sexual revolution and coupled with Darwinism and how that's created a major cultural storm.
Well, thank you so much for setting that up like that. The sexual revolution, the 60s, the sexual revolution, people had been immoral from the beginning of time. Let's face it.
Right.
But, my mom got pregnant with me in 1954. And when she did, out of wedlock with my father. And as soon as she found out she was pregnant, they immediately went and got married. And that was, whether you think that's good or not, culture said you shouldn't raise bastards. You shouldn't raise fatherless children. And so even though people acted immorally, culture said yeah, that's actually wrong. But what happened in the 60s, in the sexual revolution, which was actually Crosby, Stills and Nash, I think, sang, the motto of the 60s was, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with, which basically said, screw anybody you want, don't make commitments. It's not about covenant. If it feels good, do it. And what that did is it changed morality from the standpoint that culture said, hey, having sex outside of marriage, there's nothing wrong with that. And, if you get pregnant, it's, by 1973, Roe versus Wade, you could get abortion legally. And it said, you can be irresponsible. You can act like hell and you can still go to heaven. And there really is no wrong or right. And there's no stigma about, hey, I slept with my boyfriend, or I slept with my girlfriend. And so that began, and it climaxed really, in my mind, at Woodstock, where you had an open field concert, and people were literally having sex right there in the field. It was kind of the icon of the 60s, and it was the foundation, really, the foundational message of the sexual revolution. And then, at the same time, Darwinism was happening. Now, let's be clear. Darwinism began in the 1890s. So it was a long time before the sexual revolution. And it was introduced in the public school system in America in 1920. Darwinism was introduced as a theory in 1920. But honestly, nobody took it seriously. Like there was no big, Darwin move in the school system. Everybody had it there like a theory, and people thought of it like, well, that's one guy's idea. But what happened in the 60s, when people were living like hell and didn't want to have to answer to heaven, Darwinism really took root in our educational system. Mm-hmm. And whatever you think about Darwinism, whatever you think about evolution, it's not my argument here. But Darwin did two things. The first thing it did is it said, you aren't made in the image of God. Listen, you are an evolutionized ape or an evolutionized amoeba, depending on what form of Darwinism, what form of evolution you believe in. And the Bible says that I was created in the image and likeness of God, but Darwin said, no, you're really not. Right. And what it did is it elevated animals and it de-escalated humans to be, not divine. Like we don't have any divine origin. So that's the first thing it did. And now, we kill babies and we protect animals. Right. The second thing it did is it said, you're a cosmic accident. Like you're just, there's really no, I think John Lennon sang, imagine there's no heaven. There's no, imagine there's no hell below us, and it would just kind of create this, well, if there's no one who purposed you, then how do you have purpose? Like there is no real purpose. It's like, live and let live, eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we die. And it took away the drive for purpose, the sense of legacy, and the fact that we would have to answer for the way we lived in judgment before God. And that shifted everything. And what happened in that shift is we started a quick descent into a completely different core value system for culture, in which we basically said, if it feels good, it is good. If you feel it, you should do it. Your feelings are your identity. If you're tempted with something, you must have been, you can't say created for it because there was no creator, but you must be prone to it. And it said no, where prior to that, nobility was thought of as having a temptation that you didn't take. So, in the sexual revolution, there's a whole nother core value that basically said, if you were tempted, your temptations are your identity. So we started Like if I'm tempted with same sexual attraction, then I must be a homosexual. But the prior core value said that I am not my temptation. My identity is not in my temptation. My identity is in the virtues that I embrace, not the temptations I resist.
Right.
And the whole cultural, that sounds like a simple statement, but entire culture began to identify themselves by how they feel, not who created them.
Right. Right.
And consequently, honestly, Mark, you know who got the worst deal? Who got the worst deal were women and mothers.
Yeah.
Because women and mothers were suddenly left with the responsibility to raise children without a father. And we became the most fatherless generation. Listen to this, the most fatherless generation in the history of the world, in which our fathers were alive, but not home. And at this point in 2017, 51% of all American children were born without a dad outside of wedlock. 51%.
Unreal.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It is. Yeah, there's so much to be said about this, talking about mothers and daughters, paying the heaviest price because they literally lost their protector, a provider, a covering for the family. And, the West has been an interesting experiment for over 200 years. We're one of the first civilizations. I've got really good questions for you, but I got to skip ahead. I want to honor your time and ask you a couple more, but it's crazy. We're the first civilization to not have a rite of passage for men, no intentional process for taking boys and inviting them into manhood. We lost that. That's something that's not been present. And we're the first civilization ever to not have that present in this day. So you write about that in the book, about the power of a rite of passage. And you talk about toxic masculinity and the attack on masculinity, which I thought was so important. And you tell an amazing story. I think chapter 4 is toxic masculinity, where you talked about masculinity being under attack and why it's created elephant-sized issues in our culture today, and dealing with violence in the culture because of non-present males in the camp.
Yeah,
I want to. Would you want to speak on any of that?
So statistically, what happens when you take a father out of home? What happens? Like, we actually know. And by the way, let me just say this. You can't find statistics after 2017, and I'll tell you why after I share these statistics with you. So here's a few statistics. 90%, 75 to 90% of all inmates in America came from a fatherless home.
Right.
63% of all youth suicides are from fatherless homes. And by the way, just so you understand the impact of that, you are 5 times more likely to commit suicide if you come from a fatherless home. 5 times. Listen to this. 90% of all homeless runaway children are from fatherless homes. You are 32% more likely to run away from home if you don't have a freaking dad.
Golly.
Get this one. You are 80% of all rapists come from fatherless homes. You are 14 times. That's 1,400% more likely to rape a woman if you come from a fatherless home. You are 9 times more likely to drop out of high school. 9 times, not 9%, 9 times. That's 900% more likely to drop out of high school if you don't have a dad. So why isn't everyone shouting this? Like, why isn't every politician running on this platform? Why isn't every pastor, talking about the erosion of the family unit that is creating violence, suicide? By the way, these statistics are from 2017, and then they were going like this when they stopped keeping the statistic. And you know why you can't get statistics? Because the LGBTQ people,
right,
and I'm talking about the activists,
right,
they have gone in and said, wait a second, not having a father in home is not a dysfunction. As a matter of fact, you can have 2 mommies or two daddies, and they have rewritten what it means to be a family since the Marriage Family Act, right? So that now gay people can get married, and they want you to believe that mothers and fathers are interchangeable. So after 2017, let me say this, if American government is keeping statistics, you can't find them.
Right.
Because nobody wants to talk about what happens when you take a father out of the home. And so it's politically incorrect, right? You can't even run on a platform of family right now, because if you run on a platform of family in America, you have to call two men or two women, two gay people who are married, you have to call that a family. And statistically, if you don't have a father, a male figure in the home, you are going to be prone to be more violent. You're going to be prone to be more suicidal. You're going to be prone to drop out of school. You're going to be prone to be a runaway. You're going to be prone to end up in prison.
Yeah.
That's what the statistics tell you. And by the way, Mark, the statistics were going like this. So with the statistics I have, they're probably way worse than that.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And I'll tell you again, the statistics are damning. And people are ignoring this, but I am encouraged though. I mean, God is definitely breathing this message right now. I mean, first of all, I want to say we're talking about your book Uprising today, and this book is it is fathering. So like, who needs to read this book? Every male and female, especially in the West, because I mean, you're literally fathering us through this book. There's so much great relational issues covered here, cultural issues here, how to be a dad, the impact of a mother and a father and a present family. Like, this whole book is full of, it is a fathering book. And so I so much appreciate you taking the time to do that. But the Lord's stirring this message up. Your son, who has Brave Co., I've been following that journey. I've got friends like Jake Hamilton right now that are going after men. I've got the Lord stirred in my heart to start this podcast and create an online community for men. The Lord is definitely, he's definitely highlighting men, and in particularly fathers, to rise up in this hour. And I'm telling you, this is a textbook, I think, for anyone that's hearing that call to read this book. So I so much appreciate you writing it. And one of the things that I wanted to ask, because I know we got just a small window left of time together, I wanted to, there's several reasons for fatherlessness today. Some of it because of tragedy, some of it just because of neglect, busyness, or maybe a story like mine where you have a father that lives in the home but is so busy he's not present. But in particularly among the church, if there are fathers, many of them are failing to model spirituality to sons. And so I've said for years that there is such a need for spiritual fathers today because fathers have forgotten how to become or how to be spiritual.
Yeah.
And can you just take a moment and talk about the necessity of connecting with a spiritual father or father in general?
Yeah, I want to just invite, I feel to say this. There's going to be a lot of people watch this, live, and there'll be lots of people watch this months from now. And I want to just really challenge men, especially men who watch this, and women who you have children without, their father's not present. I want to tell you that I want to say that there is a Malachi mandate. Malachi prophesied 500 years before Christ, so somewhere around 2,500 years ago, in the last days, God would send Elijah the prophet, and restore the hearts of fathers to sons and daughters, and the hearts of sons and daughters to fathers. I really wrote this book as a restoration. The first part of the book talks about the challenge that we have in front of us, the devastation that we see around us. But the book is really about a hopeful strategy on how do we actually partner with the Holy Spirit and see families restored in our nation, both Christian and non-Christian families And, I want to say that there are so many fathers and grandfathers out there. You're in your golden years, and you're like, nobody, church doesn't want me, da da da. And I want to say, we so need you. Like, we so need you. And, right now, what we need is every healthy father to have like 10, 15 young, especially men, but daughters too, that you meet with. Like, and it's just as simple as, would you like to have coffee? Can I take you to a movie? How about, you come over to my house and split some wood, and we build a connection. It's not, we're not talking about brain surgery here. We're talking about what comes really natural to healthy fathers. And that is just connecting, talking, working together, talking through things. And our world needs that. And we're going to heal this American broken culture, one father at a time.
Yes.
So I want to really encourage that. My father drowned when I was 3. My grandfather and 4 other men came in my life, and they filled that void in me. My first spiritual father, Art Kipperman, was the most beautiful man, one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. And I buried him 15 years ago now, I think. But he just had such a huge impact on my life. And he was not, he was an engineer. He was a software engineer. He was not a talented, gifted speaker or profound Bible teacher, but he cared and he loved me. So, we say it takes a woman to give birth to a boy, but it takes a father to give birth to a man. Yes. And I want to really encourage you that are listening, you can do something. And for women, moms who like, I don't have a husband, my kid's father's not in their life. Man, just look around. Like, your responsibility is to connect your kids to some man, a coach. It can be a coach. It could be a mentor. It could be a pastor. I mean, there's just so many places where you see healthy men, and you're like, hey, can you take my boy to lunch? He just needs to have a connection with the man. You don't even have to do anything powerful. Just because moms write me all the time, like, I got 4 kids. What do I do? I got no husband. And the beautiful story of, LeBron James is my favorite basketball player, doesn't know his dad, but his baseball coach, and then later his basketball coach, took him in. Literally, his basketball coach had him live with him, and he became his father. And, what a beautiful story. I don't know if James knows the Lord, but what an incredible story. One of the best basketball players in history. He cites the fact that this man took an interest in him as what kept him off the streets. And so I want to encourage you, Mark, thank you so much for having me and this exhortation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so thankful that we're living in a day where men recognize their role as a father is so much greater than what they do behind a pulpit. And you're one of those voices and fathers that even though I don't know you personally, have made such an impact on my life. And again, we're talking about Uprising. You can get this book anywhere books are sold. Please go to KrisVallotton.com. Check out his website and please buy the book. Because again, like, this is a book that I'm buying for every father in our church family right now. This is a book that I really believe is a textbook for our generation. And wow, again, it's just a fathering book. And one of the questions, I'm not going to get to it today, was about leaving a legacy. And there's such a powerful way that you end the book about even just some practical ways of leaving a legacy. And some of the things that you say in there is worth the whole reason of getting the book. So again, thank you, Kris, for joining me today, answering my questions, and just being a voice speaking to a major issue in our culture today. So I so appreciate you.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark, I hope that we can physically meet soon.
Yeah. I've had so many invitations to come out to Bethel from friends of mine, and I've never made it yet. So I want to come visit. I just walk around the property. So if you see me just meandering around, it's me. I've been wanting to do it for years.
You come up and say hi and remind me that we were on a podcast together.
Yes, sir. Well, thanks again for your time. I appreciate you so much.
Bye now. God bless.
Bye. I want to take a moment and say thank you for listening to this episode from the Family Table. If this podcast was at all helpful to you, please tell your friends and family about it. Leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And I want to invite you to connect with me on Instagram at @MarkCasto_. Again, that's at MarkCasto_. And I look forward to connecting with you soon on the next episode of the Family Table podcast. May His peace rest upon you.